Good morning, everybody. My name is Tyson Adams, CEO of the North End Tennis Association. This is one of my many installments I'll be having this year. Tennis and Talk. I have before you Miss Octavia Haley. And basically what we're going to be doing today is bringing some light and empowerment and awareness to autism. I have the luxury of being out here with Miss Octavia Haley. How are you doing, ma'am?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So the focus of this interview basically is to bring awareness to autism in reference to certain questions and situational differences that have to do with many parents that have children with autism. You know, what does that look like? How is life different for you? So what we're going to do is we're just going to jump into some information about it, some definitions, some questions, and she's going to basically open up her home to the community in regards to what life is like parenting an autistic child. The definition of autism spectrum disorder, or also referred to as ASD.
According to the Centers for Disease Control, autism affects an estimated 1 in 54 children in the United States. You've probably heard a lot of thoughts and ideas about autism, but here's an overview of what we know. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects a person's social and communication abilities. Persons with ASD also have areas of strong interest and sometimes have repetitive behavior and sensory sensitivities. Autism is sometimes associated with strengths in the areas of visual memory, music, art, math, and science. But each person with ASD is unique. Autism is a spectrum disorder and varies significantly from person to person. Some people with ASD may require significant support in their daily lives, while others may need less support, and some live entirely independently. Changes in brain development associated with autism begin during the prenatal period. These changes are associated with differences in genetics. It is possible to diagnose ASD when a child is between 18 and 24 months of age. Early behavioral intervention helps children with autism learn to communicate and socially interact and has a significant impact on long-term outcome. Support for learning social and communication skills can be helpful throughout adolescence and adulthood. People with autism sometimes have other conditions, such as higher rates of sleep disorders, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and gastrointestinal issues. Treating these co-occurring conditions can make a big difference. As adults, people on the autism spectrum can become employed and contribute in important ways to society. The world is a better place if the qualities of people who are neurodiverse are accepted and valued.
Okay, so we're about to dive into some questions right now. Just give you a little insight on Miss Haley's experience. So, Miss Haley, what is the name of your son's autism spectrum disorder?
So he has PDD, which is pervasive developmental disorder, and it's typically known as the atypical type of autism. People who have this type of diagnosis, they typically have fewer symptoms, or they're less severe than what we would see across the entire spectrum. So that's kind of where he falls. When we look at EBN and we see him in the general public, we tend to see him as we would see anybody else. We don't necessarily always see the symptoms, or because his major issues will be with communication and socialism.
Okay.
So just walking about, he's going to appear completely normal.
Okay. So while you may have like other kids who can, visibly and, audibly, you can just tell. In his case, until you talk with him or get more personal with him, then you might see some aspects of what symptoms may be.
That's very true. He does have some, he does display some other type of symptoms, and they were more so displayed when he was younger, and he doesn't display them as often. One of them would be, you may have noticed when he first started out with you, when he would go to hit the ball or swing the racket, he would always jump with his leg. Okay. So he would have this jump in his thing, or you would see his fingers that rotate. He doesn't do it as much as he has when he was much younger, but it would tend to happen more so when there was a little bit of excitement or nervousness around him.
Okay, so that's like a coping mechanism.
So it is a coping mechanism. And he has learned to really kind of phase out of it or control it more so.
Okay.
So I haven't seen it too often now that he's older.
Okay. Do you think there's room, just from your experience, like you said that was a symptom, we don't know if it's directly related to the disorder, have you seen him progress from symptoms when he was younger that aren't necessarily symptoms right now in his latter ages?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of symptoms that he kind of would have in circumstances. So when he first started out in school, they would put him on a program on a computer, and he would oftentimes have noises like, "Ah! Ah!" and he would just shout out different types of noises. And the teachers are like, "What's going on?" And now if you put him on the computer, he's in love. He just knows what he's supposed to do, and he just contains it all within himself.
All right. And that's the key thing I want everybody to understand as well, recognizing the progression, positive progression, or just progression that gives you some insight on where they're at as far as how they deal with what's going on. That's key. I've never heard that before at all. Probably never asked it, so I wouldn't know, or dove into it that much to know whatever. Could it be maturity? Could it be chemical imbalance? Could be anything. And also, when the actual situation on that topic, based on his initial screenings and then seeing how that has changed, what type of information from like the medical aspect, as far as when he gets checkups or whoever you bring him to, is there a continual aspect of screening where they be able to give you some insight on that and why it may happen?
No, I've never really looked into it as far as that. No.
All right.
So,
and that's something, not that that's a bad or good thing.
Nope.
It's just something that maybe could bring light to anybody's situation. Okay, let me check on that. This is different. Let me go. We don't know. That's why they call it a spectrum. It is wide. It's very. I know, and from what I've researched, when I've talked to different people, it is very vague. So I appreciate you, being so candid about that. How old is your son?
He's currently 16 and a half.
Okay, 16 and a half. All right, so puberty age. We might be kind of hitting on what we just spoke on, but in between, pre-puberty and now, have you seen like a change as far as how he acts or how you have to deal with him, basically being on the spectrum?
So I know that he has some issues with comprehension. Mm-hmm. So I know when he was much younger, I would always give him one-step directions. Mm-hmm. And I still keep my directions very short when I speak to him. Mm-hmm. But now when I speak to him, I wonder, is it more so puberty and being a teenager where he tends to want to only hear me and not act or listen to what I'm saying, as opposed to actually not really understanding what's being said. Okay. So at this age, I would expect him, if he doesn't understand, to ask for redirection. What is it that you asked of me, Mom? Or something along those lines. So I now assume that if he's not following the directions or the requests that have been given to him, I assume that it's just naturally him being a teenager and choosing not to listen, as opposed to not fully understanding what is being asked of him.
Okay. Or it could be a conglomerate of both.
Oh, what I mean? I totally understand that, but I like to think on the other end. I like to think that,
No, I understand. We're parents regardless of what's going on.
I've seen so much progression in the last years that I like to think that, okay, this is just him being a typical teenager. And I know that he's still not completely typical, but in my mind, I like to believe that this is progression and this is just him being a teenager. And
that's a good thing. That's a great thing. Wonderful. Okay. What were some of the things you noticed in him that prompted you to have him screened? And also, what was the earliest point where you noticed it?
Okay, so he was born in Virginia, and when we came here to Connecticut, I initially came here, and my husband was still down in Virginia, so I was staying with my mother, and I noticed that he did not maintain eye contact. So what I would always do was be like, I would always tap my nose, because he would follow the tapping of my nose, even if he wasn't looking at me. Sometimes he would look through me, but it would look or appear as if he was paying attention to me because I was tapping my nose. Not only that, the biggest thing was that he was so attached to me. So if my mother or even his father was to try to take him into their arms and just separate him from me, he was about 9 months at this time, he would scream and holler. And it wasn't just, I'm going to scream and holler until you put me down or anything like that. It was, I'm going to scream and holler until you actually put me back in my mother's arms. It would not stop. So when I took him to the doctors at 9 months, the doctor quickly looked at his information and told me he's fine. So I trusted the doctors or the professionals' views and was like, okay, I know that I worked with kids who have had, such challenges and whatnot, but I have never worked with them at this age group. So I'm just going to trust the doctors. So then it wasn't until he started in preschool. And then in preschool, the teachers started to see a lot of issues with what was a lot more challenges. They noticed, okay, he wasn't interacting with his peers. He wasn't speaking to them. In addition to that, they just kind of thought that he was defiant and wouldn't follow directions. And so they oftentimes would want to talk to us. And then I said, well, tell me, what is it that you want us to do? And so they requested that that they would do an evaluation or request an evaluation. So we end up going through like the consultation center here in Bridgeport and everything. And they were like, nope, he's just selectively mute, and that's just what it is.
Okay. All right.
It was much later. It wasn't until he was actually 7 years old that he actually received the diagnosis of being on the spectrum, and that was because I had to take him to an outside services.
Okay.
But it was a fight because so many, I guess, because he just appears so typical.
I understand
That even though I saw things, the professionals, they would see him for such a short period of time, and it was like, nope, we know best. That's it.
Okay.
That is what it is.
So what you just said, it speaks volumes to me, and I just want the community to understand as well. That extra work, these are our children, you know what I mean? And you have the awesome task of being, his everything. So, I love the fact that you referenced that it's about going that extra mile, you know what I mean? Going here, researching, and because you want the best resources, you want the best education, you want the best everything for your child, especially, dealing with something as vague as ASD. It is vague. I feel personally they haven't tipped the iceberg, where the school's at, where the resource, you know what I mean? It's just, and I know they're probably only doing what they can. Sometimes I wonder if they could be doing a lot more.
Yeah.
But again, it's just something that's vague, and I think they're as a parent, you have to do whatever you can. If that means going to get more testing, that means going to get more testing. If that means, and I also noticed how you said you found a way to communicate with him, even when his attention was off, like you would tap your nose. That's something that's time spent for you to understand. How do you close that gap of interacting with your child? I think that's awesome. I really do.
I would just like to add one thing.
Go ahead.
So we talked about you reiterated the research and looking for outside sources. But one of the things that I felt that was most powerful in that process, since so many people had kind of just turned their back on me, was I knew when I was with him. So what I started doing is I started documenting everything. So when I was with that doctor, I went through every little video clip, and I'm like, okay, look at him. This is us feeding the ducks. This is us playing at the park. And it would just be basic things that we would be doing as a family.
Wow.
And I'm just like, watch him.
So it's like a case study for yourself, for your son. And you'll be able to go back and play it over and notice different things. And things start to click for you as far as how you can connect the dots with dealing with them. That's key. That's
and it was
wonderful.
Powerful for her because the person she saw before him, because she was unfamiliar, was totally different from the person that he would display to us as a family.
I understand. All right. Awesome. Okay, where are we at? What were some of the programs and supports that you used to help him grow and develop? How do you handle being his advocate?
That's a lot right there. So I didn't have a lot of actual programs and whatnot. Initially, my son was nonverbal. He just started speaking about 3 years ago when he was 13. So going back to my childhood, I was around a lot of children who used ASD.
Gotcha.
So what I initially started to do was use sign language to communicate with. I say ASD and I meant to say ASL.
Okay.
I apologize.
No, it's all right.
I began to use sign language to communicate with him, even if it was just him prompting me back. So that was useful because I was also working in schools. I had the opportunity to meet different people, so they talked to me about some ABA things that I was able to do with him on my own, but it wasn't through any program or anything like that. The biggest thing that was most useful for me has been friends who had already gone through the situation, and also teachers So I would, just as an example, not saying any names or anything, but I would have a sped teacher, and she would give me a lot of advice. And then we would get into our IEP meetings as a team at the school, and not a lot would come from that. But what she would do is she would take me back out after that meeting and say, okay, this is what was said in the meeting. This is how you need to proceed. And they would give me lots of advice on what I needed to do, because as a school or as a team, there was also a lot of pushback from us. So a lot of everything that I've got, yes, a lot of it came from research, things that I've already been exposed to, things that I found in the community, and mostly people who were familiar with it.
Okay, wonderful. All right. What was the biggest obstacle you have to overcome in his life?
The biggest obstacle, I would say, is perhaps dealing with the community. Because he appears so typical and normal, lots of times we would go to a function, and let's say individuals were, well, as an example, this is a true event, if they were like serving food and we're walking down the line to receive our plates or whatever, my kids would always stick together. I have 3 children, so they would always kind of stick together, and my children were prone to speak for Avian or on his behalf. Well, this older woman, and I understand what she was trying to do, and I respect what she was trying to do, but she would not tolerate the other children speaking for him. She wanted him to speak on his own behalf.
She didn't know.
She did not know.
Okay.
And so often, because people don't know, they have certain expectations for him that even if he's capable of doing, he's not comfortable doing yet. And so we don't ever push him out of that comfort zone until he's ready. Okay. So that has probably perhaps been the most challenging thing, is getting people to understand that no.
And initially, I guess the perception is, you're regular. You know what I mean? And that's not always the case. It's being a little more sensitive socially to who may be in front of you. Maybe observe a little bit more and not assume everybody's in your box. So I totally get that.
I get that. You get that. We get that. But sometimes when you're put in that moment, people don't either have the patience or the time, and it goes right out the window.
Now, how do you feel about this? Like, and it's just we're bringing up the information because, I don't want to. Do I assume that lady was just like, I don't care? I think it's more of like not knowing, miseducation.
No, she didn't know.
A level of ignorance.
She
you know what I'm saying?
Obviously didn't know. But I respect the fact that she was trying to get him to be respectful and upstanding.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, once I spoke to her, she was extremely apologetic. And, I think I think she was able to reflect on that circumstance, and probably going forward, she probably would look at those things differently when she came across different people. Every moment, every opportunity we can take as a learning experience.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. Love it, love it, love it, love it. And you mentioned you have 2 other kids, so how did you manage parenting your 2 other children while still providing additional support for your son?
So, typically in the house, we do not make my son, Avian, who has ASD, feel any different. So we treat all the kids in a similar way, which was really good because they were stair-steppers. So they're like all 2 years apart. Okay. So they kind of learned and followed behind one another.
I understand.
But my kids were very empathetic in a way. Actually, it was my daughter who brought to me a picture showing me 3 people looking over a wall or a fence into a baseball game or something like that. And she says, she goes, Mom, this is us. And I'm looking at her like, what do you mean? And she's showing me, she's like, look, this one has 1 crate, this one has 2 crate. And then, this one has no crate because they could see. If you were trying to treat us equally or the same, you would give us all a crate.
Oh, wow.
But you're giving us each what we need. And so because my kids have been so good about knowing their brother and what his needs are, I haven't had to explain it, but they've always just kind of jumped in and helped out.
Yeah.
So
that's good. That you had that level of care, consistency from them. You have an older daughter, and I think what Avian is.
He's the middle child.
He's the middle child. So that whole dynamic presents something too. So it's good to know that how you've approached your children has given them their place to know that we're all the same, and one doesn't have to feel any different than the other one, and they can just come together and do what's best for him and also for the family. I think that is that's heartwarming. I thank you for that, definitely. What is your favorite part about being his mother?
Well, I mean, there's many moments, but I think my favorite part is just seeing the progress and the accomplishments that he brings forward. I think knowing that he is capable and seeing the joy that it brings him, knowing that he's capable, brings me joy. So, I think just seeing him grow.
Yeah.
Seeing him grow, wondering where is this going to lead him in the future. I think just watching him grow is what really brings me the greatest joy.
Yeah.
And for each of my kids also.
Yeah.
But.
And I want to add on to that because he comes to my events, and what I love about him is this guy is like lethal competitively. Like lethal. I mean, competitively, if you're going up against him, he's going to push you to the max. So, I mean, that's one quality that I can say about him. You tell him what to do, he does it. And he has an extreme desire to win if he's passionate about something. So I definitely understand, where you're coming from with that. What are some of his interests?
So, his interest has kind of been his siblings. So they like to do activities that kind of keep them together. So in the earlier years, it was things like swimming and karate and gymnastics. But then as their skills develop, they start to separate them based on age or based on skill level or whatever. So when that started to happen, we started to look for other things that would really intrigue him and keep his focus. So one of them was sailing, and that's SAIL, not selling anything. And another is the North End Tennis Association. That has been phenomenal in helping him to just really be around a group of people.
Yeah.
And then when you would always have them introduce themselves or say their age or their name, those were some of his first moments where he's actually ever spoke out in public.
Wow.
And for whatever reason, what brought it out, I don't know.
Yeah.
But he feels a sense of comfort coming to the North End Tennis Association.
Yeah.
So that has been great. Right now, your tennis season hasn't started and it's too cold to sail. So what we've done is we just introduced him to the track team, which has been awesome at his school in Bassick. And I say this because typically he would wake up in the middle of the night, or maybe he was never asleep, but he would run out the house and he would just run. And considering everything that happens in our day and world, somebody who's not likely to speak or may not speak, it's not okay to be running 2 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely.
So I told the school, we need to do something. We need to instill in him some sort of pride or school spirit or something. I said, listen, the boy loves to run. Put him on the track team. So right now, he's doing the track and field, and he's really enjoying it.
That's good stuff. That's great stuff.
We're trying, and he's around people. So it's an individual sport, but he's still around people.
Okay.
So it's
and that's important. Yeah, it just feeds on any person. It should feed their self awareness. It should feed their confidence. It should feed all that. So that's good. I'm glad that he's having those type of experiences. Let's see here. How did it change your life as a mom, as a wife, as a woman?
So, in the home, it has not changed much.
Mm-hmm.
My husband has always been in denial. There ain't nothing wrong with my son. He's just quiet and shy.
Gotcha.
And I think now that he's a little older, he's starting to see a little more, or as he reads some of the paperwork. But growing up, there ain't nothing wrong with him. Just you just gotta, be hard on him or whatever it was that he felt. So in the home,
Okay.
that was kind of probably what led to us keep treating many of the kids the same. But it has changed my life, basically in the fact that he goes to school. You talk about me being his advocate. When I first started out, I didn't know anything about the whole special education services that were provided, or how to get involved, or how to speak on my son's behalf.
Yeah.
Initially, I would go there and it would just be a lot of emotion for my son that was kind of built up in there. Yes, I spoke what was true to him, but these people had their own ideas of them. So it took a lot for me to realize that first I need to make sure that I have an understanding of what it is that I need to present. But yes, the emotion is still okay, but I have to kind of contain it. So what I did is I started to bring other people to speak on his behalf, because when it comes to my son, sometimes it's hard for me to contain that emotion.
Of course.
That will come out when I'm speaking about him in such a manner as far as them telling me, hey, we pretty much know your child better than us. Maybe in the academic areas, but no, I know my child,
Yeah.
So and I think what I appreciate most about that journey, because that's exactly what it has been, has had its up and downs, is that it has allowed me to learn so much that now I can direct other families, because so many parents think that, hey, whatever the school is doing, that's all there is, and they don't know what else to look for or how else to go about finding it. So sometimes I feel like I could be a resource to those parents and helping them to advocate better for their children.
Absolutely.
So that has been a tremendous change in my life, because I used to just kind of sit back and kind of accept things, and now it's like sometimes when you want to see change, you have to do something.
Absolutely. And you've been through a full spectrum, to understand the beginning and in the middle of it, and just defining what you're dealing with for the most part, to a point of to give a level of support, and to be an advocate to point to go that hard, and in the whole grand scheme of things. So I could definitely understand why you see it that way. Are you satisfied with your school's programs and services? This may be a loaded question, so but I have to ask it. So
no, it is absolutely fine. Like I said, I always had individuals who have been on my team who have been helpful, but I have not always had the support of a team. There was times where we had to end meetings simply because of the level that they would get to. And then all of a sudden, he entered 5th grade, and I would attend these meetings at a different school, and I'm looking at the individuals, and they're like, what's wrong? I said, I'm waiting for you to come at me, because usually I come with my big old book, which is records of everything.
Lock and
this is my Bible for Aiden.
Ready to go.
You're not going to tell me anything except I'm going back to what was previously said. And and since 5th grade, I have not had to pull out anything. The individuals working with him have been very informative. They have worked together with me as a team. The transition from 8th grade to high school was a little different because of COVID and everything. So now that he is in high school, I still have teachers who are very informative and willing to help me with things, but it's just very, very different. I'm so used to being able to go into the school, and I don't know, he's in high school. He probably doesn't want his mom showing up in the school, but I'm used to being able to take more of a part, and I know COVID has definitely ended that, but maybe it wouldn't even have been allowed with him in high school. So I'm kind of just trusting on the words of the individuals working with him.
I understand.
But
make him honest, though.
It does.
Yeah, of course.
It does. It honestly does. And the other good thing about that is that, now he's kind of part of the team too. So
Gotcha.
now he gets to sit in all our meetings. So when I ask him a question, I expect him to be able to relay information to me, even if the teachers have already relayed information to me. So,
gotcha. How's COVID? How did COVID change things for you? Or did it change things? Did they stay the same? I mean, and everybody's account of that could be different. Your isolated view on how COVID managed to, change how you deal with your son, change how your son was acting, or how he was approaching life and his daily responsibilities, all that good stuff.
So, COVID obviously was a horrible thing that we all had to deal with. We lost a lot of people, but within my household, between all my children, COVID was a blessing.
Okay.
Avian loved the fact that he was able to go remote and for the final part of his 8th grade year, and remain remote for his freshman year. But it was so nice that my kids who were attending 3 different schools were able to align their schedule, whereas early in the morning they were down here playing tennis or they were walking over at Beardsley Park for their lunch breaks. So they still, and if not, they would pull up and join class from their phones. And even when I was remote, I'm like, what do you mean you're at the park? You should be in this class. Yeah. But they did it. They maintained their grades. They participated, and, you know, they enjoyed just kind of being with their family and not having to be in the presence of the school.
Yeah.
So they accept going to school, but they definitely love the whole remote thing.
Okay. And I know that's a different
and they
challenge.
did wonderful. I know there was issues, you know, within the schools about, you know, a lot of kids did not do anything. My kids actually performed well.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this is about avian, but even while remote, if I could just say that, you know, Arena managed to still graduate valedictorian of her class.
Wow.
So, they really did do well.
Okay. And I know everybody, you know, that happened to just be your isolated experience and stuff like that. I'm just glad I know a lot of kids and families suffered, whether they were, you know, regular baseline children or ASD children or whatever. Some people suffered, so I'm glad at least that your kids, you know, probably just maintained or even maybe did better during the pandemic. So I'm glad you guys had that experience, especially dealing with, you know, him being on spectrum disorder.
Well, a lot of that probably had to do with them being close in age, being such a close-knit family, and the fact that they had each other. Okay. I'm sure if they did not have each other, that experience would have been totally different.
Yeah. And you have to, a lot of that is allotted to you and your husband as well, you know, just you kind of sitting there maintaining, you know, a family life conducive to the betterment of what they can do in the midst of the pandemic. So, you know, I definitely understand that. What have you learned about raising a child? What's probably the biggest lesson you could come across? Life lesson, just understanding what that. I mean, it's a challenge, I'm sure, in certain aspects, and it's a blessing as well. And we talked about the humps and the hills and the valleys you had to go through, but what would you say your biggest learning lesson was from this?
Probably expectations. I feel like every time I set myself for an expectation, you know, I'm not saying it's not good to have standards for the children to be at, but if I expect them to perform at a certain level, typically that's not going to happen. If I expect them to act a certain way in a certain situation, something's going to happen that's not going to happen the way it was. I think having certain expectations, not really expectations, but I think having a mind frame of the way you expect them to be or what you expect them to like is basically going to set you up for failures. So for me, I've learned to give my children the freedom to basically find things, to find their own way, as long as I continue to guide them along the way.
All right.
So I think expectations was perhaps the wrong word to use in the beginning of that, but yeah.
No, I totally get what you're saying. It kind of charges them to maximize their own individual potential. They need to have something to be shooting for. If they don't meet that mark, they can learn to get there and push themselves to get there. And even in that, there's a learning curve there. So totally understand what you were trying to say.
And also, I would just add that you just got to be really, really adaptable. So sometimes, you know, we want to enforce our own likes and desires on our kids. Like, hey, check this out. Mom really enjoyed this growing up as a child, you know, thinking that the kids are going to also enjoy that. And then when they're like, hey, Mom, look at this. What do you think about this? And you're like, well, sometimes you just have to really adapt and just really take an interest in whatever their interest is, despite the fact that it may not be your interest. So you can't always force your ideas on them. Okay. You just have to accept their stuff too.
Wonderful. All right.
Probably not the greatest lesson of all, but it's definitely one that stands out for me.
Oh, okay. And again, this is about your individual journey. So if that works for you and that helps you bring everybody to the next level as far as yourself and your family and your son and your daughter, your sons and your daughter, that's what I mean. Everything is not 100% for everybody across the board. This worked for you and the dynamic of your family, and that's what matters. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
All right. So, what advice could you give to other parents regarding raising a child on the spectrum?
Well, just be patient. Children come into their own on their own time. I mean, we can't force them to be the way that we want them to be. So just be really, really patient with them. And I mean, to be honest with you, I waited almost 13 years for my baby to talk to me.
Wow.
So, and everybody kept on saying, oh, it's going to come, it's going to come, it's going to come. And I'm just like, when? When is he going to talk to me? So definitely be patient, because when it happens, the joy would just be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And also, you just need a lot of understanding, and you just need to be able to really explain to others. I mean, there's so much that you would have to do as a parent, but I mean, a lot of it's going to be individualized, but I mean, those things I think are basic that every parent, whether their child's on the spectrum or not, it's just going to apply to.
Okay.
And it's a reiteration of what you already said, but I would definitely tell parents not to be so afraid of the diagnosis as they are of what their child is going through, because the early intervention and the intervention that the child will get as to help them is way more important than what the diagnosis may be.
Okay.
So let's stop focusing on labels. Let's stop focusing on names of what our children have, and let's just help our kids.
That was huge. So, appreciate you coming out with us today. This is the month that we bring awareness to autism. It's not just about the month. We designated to do interviews like this, along with other things that we deal with in society. So just want to thank everybody for watching this when you see it. And, just give yourself that room as parents to do your due diligence, just to make sure you're paying attention to your children. Not saying you don't, but just to watch them and observe them. And if you see signs, you got to go get some type of screenings or tests done and stuff like that, because we want our children, regardless of wherever they're at on the spectrum, or if they're considered baseline, regular learning children, or whatever you may call it. We want them to maximize their individual potential. I'm still learning about it. I like to bring awareness to it because I see it every day. I see children that on different spectrums all over, and I'm just intrigued by it, because I just want them to basically do the best that they can do. So thank you all for listening. I want a special shout out to you and your family. I thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you for having us.
The Schmidt family, love you guys. My man Phoenix, you know who you are. Avaris McKnight, my man. Miss Kim, you know who you are. And just so you know, April 23rd, we'll be out here. 1:30 is registration. 2 o'clock is an instructional clinic from the North End Tennis Association. We'll be out here bringing awareness to autism again. Come out where you're blue, and hope to see you out.